On a hot August afternoon in 1963, a gospel singer named Mahalia Jackson stood just behind a Baptist preacher as he leaned into a cluster of microphones on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. The crowd stretched from the marble statue of Abraham Lincoln all the way down the reflecting pool to the Washington Monument, an ocean of hats, signs, and faces shimmering in the heat. The preacher had prepared a careful, measured text. He had revised it late into the night. He knew the stakes. The nation was watching. But as he spoke, Jackson called out behind him, "Tell them about the dream, Martin!" And in that instant, something shifted. The man at the podium, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., looked up from his manuscript and began to speak words that would echo across generations. "I have a dream." To understand why that moment has come to be known as the most powerful speech in American history, you have to rewind long before that August day in Washington. You have to trace the currents of American history, slavery and freedom, war and compromise, hope and backlash, that converged in the voice of a 34-year-old preacher standing before a monument to a president who once struggled to define liberty in a divided nation. The story begins, in a sense, in 1863, exactly 100 years before King's speech. When President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, he reframed the Civil War as a struggle not only for union, but for freedom. Yet the end of slavery did not bring equality. Reconstruction faltered. Jim Crow laws hardened across the South. Black Americans faced segregation in schools, housing, transportation, and voting booths. Lynchings terrorized communities. The promises of the 14th and 15th Amendments were hollow in practice. For decades, injustice was codified into daily life. By the early 20th century, a new generation of black leaders began pressing for change. W.E.B. Du Bois demanded immediate civil rights. Booker T. Washington advocated gradual economic progress. Organizations like the NAACP challenged segregation in the courts. The Great Migration transformed northern cities as millions of black Americans left the rural South for industrial jobs. Yet discrimination followed them, reshaped but persistent. World War II intensified contradictions. Black soldiers fought fascism abroad while facing racism at home. The Double V campaign, victory against tyranny overseas and racism domestically, captured a growing impatience. After the war, pressure mounted. In 1954, the Supreme Court's decision in Brown v. Board of Education declared segregated schools unconstitutional. The ruling ignited both hope and fury. In 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, a quiet seamstress named Rosa Parks refused to give up her bus seat. Her arrest sparked a 381-day boycott led by a young pastor newly arrived in the city, Martin Luther King Jr., a graduate of Morehouse College, Crozer Theological Seminary, and Boston University. King drew on the teachings of Jesus and the nonviolent resistance of Mahatma Gandhi. His speeches during the Montgomery bus boycott revealed a remarkable gift. He could frame a local grievance within the broad sweep of American ideals. He spoke of justice, love, and the Constitution in the same breath. He quoted the Declaration of Independence like scripture. King's oratory did not emerge from nowhere. He grew up listening to his father preach at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. He absorbed the rhythms of the black church, the call and response, the crescendo, the improvisation. He studied theology and philosophy. He admired Abraham Lincoln and Thomas Jefferson, but he also read Reinhard Niebuhr and Paul Tillich. By the late 1950s, he had become the most visible face of a movement that was spreading across the South through sit-ins, freedom rides, and voter registration drives. The early 1960s were turbulent. In Birmingham, Alabama, protesters faced police dogs and fire hoses. Images of children blasted by water cannons shocked the world. President John F. Kennedy, initially cautious, began to frame civil rights as a moral issue. Behind the scenes, movement leaders debated strategy. Some favored continued grassroots pressure. Others sought a dramatic national demonstration that would force Congress to act. The idea of a march on Washington was not new. In 1941, labor leader A.F. Philip Randolph had threatened a march to protest discrimination in defense industries, prompting President Franklin D. Roosevelt to issue an executive order banning such discrimination. In 1963, Randolph revived the concept, this time calling for jobs and freedom. The march would demand comprehensive civil rights legislation, a higher minimum wage, and fair employment practices. Organizing the march required delicate coalition building. Established groups like the NAACP, led by Roy Wilkins, worked alongside younger activists from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. There were tensions over tone and tactics. Some feared violence. Others worried about alienating white allies. The Kennedy administration, wary of unrest, urged moderation.
King and his advisors understood that the speech he would deliver had to do many things at once. It had to inspire the crowd without frightening lawmakers. It had to challenge injustice while affirming American ideals. It had to channel anger without descending into bitterness. Drafts circulated among close associates. Phrases were borrowed and reshaped. King had used the dream motif before in earlier sermons and speeches, but in the final draft prepared for August 28, 1963, the dream appeared only briefly near the end. When the day arrived, the crowd exceeded expectations. More than 200,000 people, black and white, young and old, gathered peacefully. Gospel songs filled the air. Celebrities like Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte attended. The atmosphere was both festive and solemn. King spoke near the end of the program. He began formally invoking Lincoln and the great beacon light of hope of the Emancipation Proclamation. Then he pivoted to a metaphor that would frame the first half of his address. America had written a promissory note guaranteeing life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But black citizens had come to the nation's capital to cash that check, only to find it marked insufficient funds. It was a brilliant rhetorical move, firm yet patriotic. He did not reject the American promise, he insisted it be honored. His cadence was measured at first. He warned against the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. He urged discipline and nonviolence. He declared that the struggle would continue until justice rolled down like waters, a line echoing the prophet Amos. Then, as Mahalia Jackson called out behind him, King shifted. He pushed aside the prepared text and entered the improvisational style of the black pulpit. "I have a dream," he began, and the crowd stirred. He spoke of a dream rooted in the American dream, a dream that one day sons of former slaves and sons of former slave owners would sit together at the table of brotherhood. He imagined Mississippi transformed from a state sweltering with injustice into an oasis of freedom. He envisioned his own children judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. The repetition built momentum. Each "I have a dream" was both personal and collective, intimate and national. He painted vivid scenes, Alabama's governor having his lips dripping with words of interposition and nullification, little black boys and girls joining hands with little white boys and girls. The imagery was specific, grounded in real politics and real pain. He concluded by weaving in "My country, 'tis of thee," calling for freedom to ring from the hilltops of New Hampshire to the mountains of Tennessee. The geographic sweep reinforced the idea that civil rights was not a regional issue, but a national one. When he proclaimed, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last," the crowd erupted. The immediate reaction was electric. Newspapers across the country praised the speech. Television broadcasts carried excerpts into living rooms nationwide. President Kennedy, watching from the White House, reportedly told King afterward, "I have a dream." The phrase had already become shorthand for a moral vision. Yet not everyone was convinced. Some younger activists felt the speech was too conciliatory. They worried that invoking the American dream glossed over the depth of structural racism. Malcolm X dismissed the march as a farce on Washington, criticizing its coordination with federal authorities. Within SNCC, frustration simmered about compromise language in other speeches that day. Still, the address altered the trajectory of the movement. In the months that followed, momentum built for the Civil Rights Act. After Kennedy's assassination in November 1963, President Lyndon B. Johnson invoked King's moral appeal as he pushed the legislation through Congress. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act was signed into law, outlawing segregation in public accommodations and employment discrimination. In 1965, after further activism and the brutal crackdown on marchers in Selma, the Voting Rights Act followed. King's speech did not single-handedly produce these laws. Years of organizing, sacrifice, and strategy made them possible, but it crystallized the moral argument in a way few other moments had. It offered a language that Americans across racial and political lines could understand. Over time, "I Have a Dream" entered classrooms and textbooks. Its phrases became fixtures of national memory. Yet the speech's legacy has been contested. Some critics argue that the most quoted line about judging children by character rather than skin color has been selectively used to downplay ongoing inequalities. Others note that King's broader critique of economic injustice and militarism is often overlooked. In the years after 1963, King's message grew more radical. He spoke out against the Vietnam War. He called for a poor people's campaign to address economic inequality. His popularity declined. When he was assassinated in 1968, the nation convulsed in grief and unrest. Only later did a broad consensus elevate him to near-mythic status.
Yet that August day endures. The power of the speech lies not only in its poetry, but in its timing. It came at a moment when television could carry it to millions. It fused biblical cadence with constitutional principle. It held up a mirror to America and asked it to live up to its own words. Even now, decades later, the steps of the Lincoln Memorial bear a marker showing where King stood. Visitors read the inscription and look out over the reflecting pool, imagining the crowd, the heat, the urgency. They hear the echoes of a voice that dared to dream aloud. What makes a speech powerful? Is it the eloquence of its language, the righteousness of its cause, the scale of its audience, or the change it inspires? In the case of "I Have a Dream," it was all of these. It was a sermon, a protest, and a patriotic appeal woven together. It was rooted in centuries of struggle and aimed toward a horizon still not fully reached. The story of that speech is not only about one man or one day. It is about a nation wrestling with its ideals. It is about the capacity of words, spoken at the right moment, in the right place, to move hearts and bend history. And as long as Americans continue to debate freedom, equality, and justice, the dream voiced in 1963 will remain both a memory and a challenge, echoing across time like a bell that has not yet stopped ringing. If this journey through history sparked your curiosity, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Tell us which explorer or historical figure you want to uncover next, because the past is packed with bold risks, untold stories, and forgotten paths that quietly reshaped the world we live in today.